Years ago, I believe the governor's name in Oregon was Tom McCall, one of the last liberal Republicans. Well, not my buddy Mark Hatfield. And then Bob let me keep a daily journal of ogling my secretary's Packwood. They were kind of the mod squad, the liberal Republicans from Oregon. But Tom McCall started a whole campaign. There'd be a sign at the state line. Welcome, if you're from California, turn around and go home. And the slogan was, I know it's a family show, and you see this word you see a variation of this word. You see the root word in the Holy Bible. It was, don't Californicate Oregon. And both Arizona and Tennessee are saying that, look, we're happy if you come, and we appreciate opinions freely expressed, but don't come in and try to lecture us against hard work, white bread, and the Baptist Church. I mean, just accept those entities as they are. Hey, by the way, did you have a great Independence Day? And you're going, oh, JD, the years have passed. You've rounded the curve. Au contraire. As Jeff Dunitz from The Lid reminded us via the internet, Sunday, July 2nd, is the 247th anniversary of the Continental Congress voting to secede from the British Crown. You heard that right. July 2nd is America's actual Independence Day. Now, there was a little problem. The New York legislature was as whacked out then as it was now. Now, actually, it was just a communications problem, even though Philly and New York geographically much closer than, say, South Carolina or Georgia. So on July 2nd, 12 of the 13 colonies approved the Resolution of Independence, but the guys from New York were saying, talk to me. We don't have a read from our state entity. You wouldn't call this fake news, or maybe some people would. On the evening of July 2nd, the Pennsylvania Evening Post wrote, quote, this day, the Continental Congress declared the United Colonies free and independent states. So they voted on the initial resolution, but the document known as the Declaration of Independence, there were some changes to the wording. Finally, the word comes in from New York, yeah, we'll go along with you guys. So the resolution was officially passed with New York's vote on July 3rd. John Adams, who had become the second president of the United States, wrote to his dear wife, Abigail. And he told, first of all, the way he would address Abigail was both romantic and practical, at least to my ears. He would begin every letter with, my dearest friend. And he wrote, the wife of one president, the mother of another, quoting, the second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the Day of Deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. But as it turned out, July 4th, the date the much publicized Declaration of Independence was approved, rather than on the 2nd of July, the day the Resolution of Independence was adopted and passed in that closed session of Congress, awaiting the New York vote. It was still unfinished business, but by July 4th, the Declaration of Independence that you and I hold so dear was finalized, signed. By July 8th, printed copies were out and in the public consciousness. July 4th became the day that we have celebrated for almost 2 centuries and a half. So you and I have heard all about the spirit of 76, but let's ponder the spirit of the second day of the 7th month in 1776. On that day, 247 years ago, eloquent words were spoken, passionately delivered by a Virginia delegate on the floor of the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Why then, sir, do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. That entreaty, as motivational as it was inspirational, was not delivered by Patrick Henry. Nor did those words come from George Washington. And as the youngest delegate from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's way with words won him the assignment of drafting that detailed document that eventually became the center of the debate, as he was much more comfortable with the written word than with the spoken. But another Virginian proved an effective communicator in both print and speech. The resolution he had drafted almost a month earlier, and which was on the floor for an early July vote, was as direct as it was impassioned. Resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Sadly, the name of this forgotten founding father seems to have been written in disappearing ink. In the recollection of the baby boomer speaking to you now, the name was only encountered once in a middle school textbook for American history, rightfully crediting this man with the authorship of the aforementioned resolution. He was Richard Henry Lee. Think of him as a revolutionary hero remembered by few, and the most important founding father you may never have heard of. In this age of wokeness, Lee's anonymity is actually an asset. Consider that 3 public schools bear the name Richard Henry Lee Elementary, one in Glen Burnie, Maryland, another in Chicago, and the third in Rossmore, California. Thus far, no efforts have been undertaken to strip Lee's name from these schools, but, of course, that could change. Then again, the inevitable abbreviations, R.H. Lee School in Chicago or Lee Elementary in California, sound somewhat innocuous. Only the Maryland institution uses Lee's full name on its school building, and you can expect the cynical smart money crowd to wager that the woke will soon mount a cancel campaign to drop that school name. Yes, because you see, Richard Henry was one of those Lees, the wealthy and influential family in Virginia politics and American history. No, he was not Light Horse Harry Lee. Don't confuse him. Light Horse Harry Lee. That nickname belonged to Henry Lee III, who distinguished himself as a cavalry officer in the Revolutionary Army, and who was the father of yet another military man, General Robert E. Lee, who led the Army of Northern Virginia against the Union Army in the Civil War. While Scripture and Shakespeare may both reference the sins of the father, there is no admonition regarding the future actions of a first cousin twice removed. Yet the reputation of Richard Henry Lee has been adversely affected by the actions of his younger, distant relative, at least in the entertainment arena thus far. A half-century ago, there was nothing called woke, but there was the musical production 1776, and dramatic license combined with comic necessity turned Richard Henry Lee into a singing stumblebum. In the rhythmic, revisionist plot of the stage play, more familiar names in history, Ben Franklin and John Adams, persuade Lee to introduce that independence resolution, since Franklin has offered Adams the candid advice that the man from Massachusetts is too unpopular to expect success were he to author and offer that course of action. In the musical, a direct appeal to Lee's vanity produces the desired results through a song entitled The Lees of Old Virginia. But away from the roar of the grease paint and the smell of the crowd, the real John Adams sang the praises of the Richard Henry Lee he actually knew, calling him, quote, a masterly man. Lee certainly proved that with his bold resolution demanding independence for the United Colonies. And Lee's floor speech on the 2nd day of July 1776 proved that the Virginia aristocrat took on a leadership role second to none on that 2nd day of July, even if most Americans don't know who he is. 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. Recovering Congressman JD Hayworth with you. Back in just a minute.
Still trying to get everyone's power restored in Middle Tennessee and get a load of what went down in parts of Pennsylvania yesterday. People described tornadoes out of nowhere. Hear one of the stories coming up at 9:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
We gonna be all ears, all over that thing. Mercy. The thing is, what we call this in the biz is a reset. The news comes your way in about 3 minutes because it's 9:27 Central Daylight Time, and it's the recovering Congressman JD Hayworth back with you on the day before Independence Day. Coming up in mere moments, there was a big July celebration, first day of July. That would have been Saturday, in a place I know fairly well for my adventures in television, the upstate of South Carolina, Pickens County, South Carolina. Donald John Trump, 45th President of the United States, hoping to become the 47th President, and in so doing, become the 21st century equivalent of Democrat Grover Cleveland, although without a doubt the Donald will say, this is amazing. It's never been done, at least for a Republican. It's exceptional. It's unbelievable. Oh, it's just so great. That's what he's hoping to say. You know, that's the thing about Trump. One of my buddies, just one little congressional story. One of my buddies from Georgia approached me one day. I was walking back from a vote, and he said, JD, man, you ever met Ted Turner? I said, well, sure. I was a sportscaster, and we'd go down to spring training, and I remember one day Ted had all the Brave sponsors down, and they were having like a little baseball clinic for the kids. He said, man, that guy's a born salesman. He came into my office, and he just put his feet up, and he grabbed that bottle of Coca-Cola and those peanuts, and he poured them down the Cokes down. He said, what's going on? Well, and that was even Ted Turner in the midst of his romantic entanglements with Hanoi Jane Fonda. But the trait of these gents who do exceptionally well is they know how to sell themselves. No, I'm not talking corruption. I am talking about, for a lot of folks, they know how to get them excited. And so it is with Donald John Trump. But when we come back, oh, mercy. There was one guy in the company of President Trump who excited the folks the wrong way. You're going to hear all about that. Right now, 9:30. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories, and there are still a few thousand Tennesseans without electricity here in the mid-state. Nashville Electric Service has called in crews from Kentucky to help. They should have lots of time today with very low risk of showers and thunderstorms. The best chance for that is going to be south of Murfreesboro, but still can't rule out a stray one or two. We'll tell you all about it during the full forecast in 2 minutes. Get a load of what went down in parts of Pennsylvania yesterday. George Rutherford says a twister came out of nowhere, flipped over his fruit stand.
I grabbed my girlfriend and grabbed the holder to keep her from getting hit, and it came through and just left loose. Next thing I know, we're on the ground and the building's on top of us.
Yeah, in Chicago, people are wading through hip-deep water, leaving cars behind to escape the severe flooding from nearly 9 inches of rain in just a matter of hours. And right now in South Nashville, there are no serious injuries reported, but some residents were treated for smoke inhalation and heat-related issues when fire broke out at the Gazebo apartment complex. 10 families lost their homes. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. You often hear me talk about diversification in the investing process, but how do we diversify? Well, we look for things that move in dissimilar fashion historically. Some of those market areas might be really small companies or really large companies, or very growth-oriented companies or value-oriented companies. One of the things that we find is that when we diversify between these various segments, we can reduce the volatility of the portfolio because they don't move in tandem with each other historically. Now we can do that in U.S. markets, we can do that in international markets, and in emerging markets. And when we can dampen that volatility, we can help get ourselves a little bit of a better outcome as far as knowing what we might likely have in the future or how we can take income from our investment portfolio. Now we also want to add fixed income or bonds to the mix as well. Now, if we know that we need to do this, what's the best way to do it? Well, one of the things that we often teach is this concept of market efficiency. This won the Nobel Prize in economics as well. And it's the idea that if I'm investing in, let's say, small value stocks, if we look at professional managers and their ability to say, hey, should I have this stock or that one, and picking companies or areas of the market, we find that they typically get lower returns than the market does on its own. They just add expense and they can add a lot of volatility. One of the things we want to avoid is anything that can hurt your returns and increase your risk in the investing process. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call or call 615-851-1950.
23 minutes in front of 10, 9:37 a.m. It's Monday, July 3rd. It's the recovering Congressman JD Hayworth of Arizona with you today, and then Wednesday through Friday here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN, unless staff and management say that's very good, and you just stay out there in the desert. But here's hoping that doesn't happen. If you'd like to talk with me, give me a call, 615. You see, one of the problems with those of us who serve in Congress, actually members of both parties, is that we are illnumerate. Thank you very much. I kind of coined that phrase. I mean, if you can't read, you're illiterate. So if you have difficulty with math, I guess the term would be illnumerate. So let me try it again. 615-737-9986. 615-737-WWTN. Now, if you're a little worried about other folks hearing what you have to say to me, well, if you need a dose of keyboard courage, there is a way you can contact me via social media. Got off the Facebook thing long time ago when it was announced that Zuckerberg was playing us all for suckers, and under the guise of philanthropy, he was trying to fix things in 2020 in key precincts with, well, basically what used to be called walking around money, but that time out it was trade stuff. It was technical stuff, basically to help the left. And closed circuit to the multi-billionaire man-child. I don't cotton to that stuff, so I don't patronize your hoo-ha facilities or products anymore. So you may say, well, JD, LinkedIn is kind of on the left as well. Yeah, but for whatever reason, it's easy for me to use. Tell you what, if you want to reach out to me at linkedin.com, all you have to do is go to that little search box, type J.D. Hayworth, Hayworth. It's different from Cousin Todd, who's listening in. He's an H-A-W Hayworth, which is why I always tell you when you see Cousin Todd, just ask him why. Little family joke. Yeah, again, J.D. Hayworth. You get LinkedIn with me, and then you can use the little messaging device, and we can communicate that way. Now, when you and I get together and we do this highfalutin communicating, I often point out that my 12 years of service in the Congress of the United States allowed me to see things from the inside. I can, my political instincts, what mild-mannered Peter Parker might call his spidey senses, well, they come alive on occasion, and I can offer insights and analysis based on the whole been there, done that thing. But sometimes you don't have to have been there and done that. Sometimes things are so obvious that you can just see and hear what's going on. Take, for example, the big weekend wing-ding, the Trump rally up in Pickens County, South Carolina. Now, that's a short drive from Greenville, the metropolis of the upstate, although folks often talk about Greenville, Spartanburg. The TV market is really hyphenated. It's Greenville, Spartanburg, Asheville, up across the North Carolina line, up in the mountains, and boy, they got about as many hippies in Asheville as we have out in Flagstaff, Arizona these days. Must be the altitude and the herbal supplements. But I digress. At any rate, Pickens County, Every time I think, great folks in Pickens. But I always think of one of our great photographers at Channel 4 in Greenville. He shall remain nameless because I think he's one of these guys. I tried to, back in the days of Facebook, I tried to reach out to him. I wanted to friend him. It was many years after working with this guy. But I think he's one of the dudes who let politics get in the way. He remained incommunicado. He chose not to associate with me, but he would... there's always this tension between those who imagine themselves cosmopolitan, not that Greenville is a metropolis, and then on out in the rural areas like Pickens. So this guy would come in and start his day by going, "Are from Pickens and are stupid." Actually, he was making fun of a kid who was an intern, actually got hired at the callow age of 18. Because he was from Pickens and the guy was learning the ropes. And so this more senior photographer would always greet him with, "Are from Pickens and are stupid." Rest assured, if you hail from the town of Pickens or greater Pickens County, I do not think you're stupid. I only wanted to candidly share that memory and get a cheap laugh with a vocal bit. Speaking of being vocal, a guy who imagined himself a favorite son of Pickens, a guy I nicknamed years ago Lindsay the Lilac. He and I came to Congress together, and he got himself elected to the U.S. Senate upon the demise of J. Strom Thurmond. And Lindsay thinks he's going to go out as the favorite son, but he finds out that the folks in Pickens react in a way that says to him, "Lindsay, you're an SOB," and they do not mean sweet old boy. Take a listen to the way it went down Saturday. This is cut one.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome United States Senator Lindsey Graham.
Well, Lindsey hears that. He's going, I got some trouble. Good thing I can raise all that money on K Street and get them skillful ads. Now let's see, how am I gonna calm these folks down? Oh, I got it. I was a JAG officer in the Air Force. I'll just talk military. The way I used to always talk about starting wars everywhere. I'm going to talk about the military, Medal of Honor winners. Now I'm going to try to link up with it by reminding these fine folks I'm a local boy. Yeah, that'll work. Well, did it? Take a listen to cut two.
Welcome to Pickens County. A little bit about this county. Just calm down for a second. I think you'll like this. Pickens County has more Medal of Honor winners per capita than any place in the nation. I was born in this county. I live 15 miles down the road.
Well, that didn't work. And then Trump comes up. And you know, Trump has a speech and he doesn't read it ahead of time. So he'll get along, he'll get talking, go, "I just said this, it was written for me. Hey, it sounds pretty good." I mean, he'll offer these little editorial asides. And you know he relished this opportunity since Lindsey always wants to go down to Mar-a-Lago and play golf with Donald Trump and then goes back to D.C. and says, "He just needs to quit talking about 2020. I'm just giving him some tough love." Look, Lindsey's whole M.O., his mama and his daddy, rest their souls, and this is not funny. He lost both of his parents at a young age and became the ward of his younger sister, I think during his days at the University of South Carolina. And that's tough. And it's a very tough situation. But back in the days when his mama and daddy were running what Lindsey himself calls a beer joint there in Pickens County, Lindsey was a little guy, and he was kind of like not really an urchin, but he was his mom and daddy's eyes and ears. And his deal was to go around, listen, see who was going to fight with who. And Lindsey learned the trick of ingratiation. Ingratiating himself. I guess that would be ingratiation, wouldn't it? Well, you English teachers can call and assail me the way that some assailed the late J. Hannah Dizzy Dean for his malaprops and misuse of English during sportscasts. Maybe one day a story about that, but it's not the time. At any rate, so he always goes up, he befriends guy. Hey, there's John McCain. I'm going to be his buddy. And actually, he takes it beyond that. Remember the episode? They used to bring back Howard Morris as Ernest T. Bass on the Andy Griffith Show. Remember that? And Howard Morris was a gifted director, comedian, actor on Broadway. But, man, he would become that rural wild man, Ernest T. Bass. Sheriff. And he'd go up to Andy and he'd say, be my father figure. And he'd see the teacher, Helen Crump, be my mother figure. And, look, I don't mean to get into kind of the political psychology, but let's be honest. Lindsey decided that John and Cindy Lou McCain were going to be pseudo-parents. That John was like his political daddy. It's been tried before. I mean, LBJ said of FDR, he was like a second daddy to me, emphasizing that tight connection. Well, Donald Trump gets in this situation where he is now at the podium. And you know that Trump, he's following Lincoln's advice, keep your friends close and your adversaries closer. He thinks he can use Lindsey to great effect. After all, South Carolina's junior senator, Tim Scott, is running for the Republican nomination, as is the former governor and Trump's UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. So he wants to keep Lindsey Graham close to him, and he also wants to teach Lindsey a lesson. When we come back, the way Trump on the stump teaches Lindsey the lilac an important life lesson. Right now, it's 10 till 10. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Polling shows most Americans approve of some of what came down from the Supreme Court last week. We've got the new numbers, and Governor Lee has signed a new executive order. We'll give you the details on that coming up at 10 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Man, I can hardly wait to hear that, because that's what you call quantification. When you get those numbers showing that common sense Americans agree with common sense and want to see it reinforced in the interpretation of the Constitution, a document of limited and enumerated powers, well, mark me down as very interested to hear that.
The numbers don't lie, do they, Brother JD?
They don't. Enumerate though I may be, and you're going to walk me through that very slowly, I know. And I look forward to it at 10, that incisive, insightful delivery that you provide. We can hardly wait. It's, less than 3 minutes from now, so make sure those pipes are in working order, and I will be all ears. That's why you got that. That's why you got that call switch on there. Or here was the one. Kimmel Kirken-Carnes cruelly kept the kiss his cousin Catherine Kennedy cried for. Yes, voice and articulation for the stage.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot
All right, brother.
pole.
That's right. We ain't gonna mess with that. That cousinly Elvis starting that thing, kissing cousin. Okay, another thing, another story, another time. If you're just joining us, welcome in to the day before Independence Day in honor of our big holiday. Over in Pickens County, South Carolina, one Donald John Trump held a rally on Saturday, and it was something. See, Pickens is only about 3,000 people. 50,000 people show up. And it seemed that all of them were booing South Carolina's senior senator, Lindsey Graham, my old House colleague. So Lindsey just makes it worse. We don't have the cut, but he says something. Well, we do have something in common. I like President Trump, and Trump likes himself, and Lindsey always tries to be the little clever fellow, the little rural oracle, and he steps in it. So Trump gets up and has the chance to school Lindsey Graham. Here's the way he did it, cut 3.
Even Lindsey down here, Senator Lindsey Graham, we love Senator Graham. We're gonna love him. We're gonna love him. I know, it's half and half. But when I need some of those liberal votes, he's always there to help me get them, okay? We got some pretty liberal people, but he's good. He's good.
Oh, that was classic. Did you hear that? Lindsey, I own you. These people don't like you. But he's good. He's good. Very clever way. Lindsey, you better straighten up. But you can help me with liberal votes. Yeah, you can go talk to Lisa Murkowski and folks like that. Brilliant. When we come back, what some of the other GOPers are doing, and one kind of wild computer campaign video ad. It's JD. Don't go away. It's flat out straight up 10 a.m.
Ten o'clock on the dot. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories, and I've got a slowdown reported. This is going to be 40 eastbound. It's just before Bellevue. You got a stalled vehicle slowing things down there west of downtown. And crews are working to restore everyone's power in Middle Tennessee. Still about 1,700 outages from what was 40,000 after strong storms downed trees into lines yesterday. Full forecast in 2 minutes. New polling shows a majority of Americans support some of what the U.S. Supreme Court decided last week.
the independence of the Supreme Court. But the poll also found that Americans agreed with two of the blockbuster rulings by that conservative majority. 52% of Americans approve of the Supreme Court decision effectively ending affirmative action and restricting the use of race as a factor in college admissions. And on that other major ruling, the court's decision to strike down President Biden's program to forgive up to $20,000 in student loan debt, our poll found 45% of Americans approve, while 40% disapprove.
As Karen Travers at the White House. Right now in Tennessee, Governor Lee just signed an executive order his office says positions the state to lead the nation as the best state for service members, veterans, and their families to thrive. The order requires the 13-member Tri-Stars and Stripes Council to increase coordination between all state agencies related to military and veterans, ensure both private and public military and veteran programs are working together, and pursue ways to enhance the quality of life for military members, veterans, and their families. This council is required to submit a plan to Governor Lee by January 1st. That's the latest news. Traffic and weather next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Coming up on 5 minutes past 10 Central Daylight Time, recovering United States Congressman JD Hayworth, so honored, happy, enthusiastic, stoked about being with you again right here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. So Brother Ken brought us the numbers about the Supreme Court's big decisions, what we call in both journalism and politics, landmark decisions late last week. And we will hear some of the leftist wailing and gnashing of teeth next hour. This hour, although, and let's understand it, about the courts, it's why at NC State, in political science, there was a class we took on political process and the courts. And not too far from NC State. In fact, the guy who taught me that course later was a professor at Duke, still undergraduate, where my dear mother went to school. At any rate, Duke Law School has as a guest prior to her ascension to the Supreme Court, then federal judge Sonia Sotomayor. And to paraphrase what she said during that kind of town hall presentation that was being videotaped, she basically said this: look, can we just end the charade? We use the law to advance our political agenda. Now, that's a paraphrase. And then somebody says, Your Honor, this is being taped. And there's a little peal of nervous laughter. And then at that time, now Justice Sonia Sotomayor basically says, oh, I was just kidding. Yeah, right. Politics permeates the judicial branch, and we'll get into that next hour. So things are going so well for Donald Trump, at least in the pursuit of the Republican nomination. Now, here's the standard caveat. Former Senator Phil Gramm of Texas, who grew up in Georgia and moved to Texas later in life, he really had an accent like molasses. Remember what Phil would say? 6 months is like a lifetime in politics. And that's true. So things can change. But right now, things are going so well. For example, just take South Carolina, where Donald Trump appeared. There he is cruising along in the polling stratosphere all by himself. And the two candidates from South Carolina, former Governor Nikki Haley and current United States Senator Tim Scott, they're down in the single digits. Now, the only other Republican candidate with double digits nationally and in most states is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And now, since social media is rocking and rolling, you don't have to wait and buy TV time. You can put together video attack ads. So the Twitter account belonging to the DeSantis War Room decided to put together a video that attacks Donald Trump over leniency on the pride and the trans issue. Now, what they do is they go back and grab videotape from Trump's first campaign, and then they spice it up at the end with a drag queen wearing like a beauty pageant sash saying like Miss MAGA or something like that. At any rate, here is the audio montage. You see, that works better on the medium we're sharing right now than video would, understandably. Take a listen to cut 4.
I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens.
If Caitlyn Jenner were to walk into Trump Tower and want to use the bathroom, you would be fine with her using any bathroom she chooses.
That is correct.
In the future, can transgender women compete in Miss Universe?
Yes.
Make America great again.
Okay, so that's the snippet. Now, following that, there are, I got to tell you, let me peel back the curtain. I don't know this for a fact, but my spidey sense and my recovering congressman sense is that Karl Rove and the Bush bunch have their hands all over this thing. And they use video of Governor DeSantis wearing his shades, which I guess is supposed to look decisive, authoritative. Hint, Biden wears those aviator shades, so you might want to ditch them. And then it's got all these headlines, but well, let me read you an ostensibly objective account. This is the text that accompanied the video and the audio snippet on realclearpolitics.com. The rapid response team for the campaign of Governor Ron DeSantis retweeted this video highlighting former President Trump's support for LGBT and transgender athlete Caitlyn Jennings in contrast with the draconian stance of DeSantis, showing coverage of their candidate, the Florida governor, interspersed with quick shots of the bodybuilder Chad meme and Brad Pitt in his 2004 movie role as Alexander the Great. So one of the other double-digit cellar dwellers, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Chris took a break from the all-you-can-eat buffet to show up on CNN's State of the Union yesterday. And Chris is trying to go with the Mod Squad. The most diplomatic way I can put it, he's absolutely, quote, libertarian. I don't mean to upset you if you're libertarian. Here are the rest of the sentence. He's hands off about what is the term they're using for castration and disfigurement? Gender affirming care and surgical procedures for minors. Christie's hands off that. And see, there's a strain of mod squatters within the Republican Party who say, no, those aren't the real issues. Those aren't the real issues. Well, society has to maintain norms to maintain a society. It doesn't mean that we have to treat those who are confronting challenges in their lives callously. But by the same token, you look at what has happened to the left, and I'm sorry, there's no way to sugarcoat it. The modern Democrat Party is becoming the haven of Marxists, misfits, and miscreants. So Governor Christie is trying to say, hey, I'm the guy who the issues are not these. And, of course, the thing is, since both Trump and DeSantis are several points ahead of him in the polls, old Chris Christie decides to discredit them both. But as he's listing the challenges confronting America, he leads with what I'm going to call a top-of-mind comment. You know how sometimes you'll see a word association game? Well, sometimes in these Sunday morning interviews or extended interviews, you will learn a lot about a candidate or public official with the illustrations and examples they use. Listen closely to Chris Christie, first criticizing the two GOP frontrunners and then citing the problem that to him is top of mind. Cut 5.
I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm not comfortable with the way both Governor DeSantis and Donald Trump are moving our debate in this country. You know, we have 9.5 million children in this country every night who go to bed hungry.
Okay, and that's a legitimate problem. I get it. And maybe his consultants are telling him, whoa, hey, Governor, after that thing on gender-affirming care, you better mention kids in another way every time you go out. But those of us, and yes, this is a pot, meat, kettle moment, because like Governor Christie, 20 years ago when I was in the Congress, I had weight control surgery. I got fixed anatomically. Chris got that belt that can be loosened, the internal thing. And apparently that lap belt is way loose on Chris. Of all the problems for a candidate who deals with weight challenges to lead with about kids going to bed hungry, there's got to be something else. Maybe the schools. Oh, but that might get back into social stuff. And he's trying to get the younger folks and the moderate Republicans who, I just want to deal with the issues and, societal decay and family norms collapsing. Why, those aren't the real issues. So Chris is trying to build his coalition that way. Then he continues his criticism. And again, I got to tell you, were I the candidate, and having been a candidate when I was really a big old boy, over 3 bills, yeah, sure, I've shrunk now to 6'4.5", so I had a little more room to stack the tonnage. But I don't think, in this case, were I Chris Christie, I would have gone with the whole notion that Ron and Don are having their dust up and sounding like a couple of bickering kids on the playground. Unfortunately, Chris uses another illustration involving food. Take a listen to cut 6.
And this type of video does nothing to address those issues. And it is a teenage, food fight between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump.
Hey, Chris, lay off the food talk. You know what that does to you, pal? And I had a campaign manager who said, look, you're a big guy. Don't spend your time talking about weight. And then later, once I had the surgery, I had to address it because otherwise people would have thought I had some sort of wasting away disease. Kind of like, you guys seen Clinton lately? Anyway. So at times you have to do your whole health disclosure thing. But you see what happens, right? You can hear the rejoinder from Trump. What is it about Chris? He's always talking food. He said that DeSantis and I were in a food fight. Hey, pal, you've been in a food fight your entire life, and it looks like the food is winning. I mean, that's and people love Trump for that. Why? Because it's not the typical response from the politician. Here's a thought experiment for you. Remember the 2012 presidential debate between Obama and Romney. Romney had won the first one. So Obama and the media have to come back and get him. And the big deal was, I think this was, look, a woman is moderating the debate. And it was CNN's Candy Crowley. And Candy's a very nice lady. In fact, I was walking into the Capitol one day. Congressman, good to see you. My kids are down at the University of Arizona. Wow, that's interesting, Candy. And we compared TV news stories, and she was very genial, very nice. But remember the end of that debate? She goes to Obama's defense, and Plastic Man Mitt just kind of sits there with that game show host grin on his face. You and I both know what the response would have been had Trump been the nominee. Hey, put a cork in it, sister, or grab a donut. Now I know why they call you Candy. I mean, you know that Trump would have done that. And people love him for it. Now, maybe you don't like that. Maybe that's not your cup of tea. But if you stop and think, you'll know that both in your mind and, to use the old Goldwater slogan, in your heart, you'll know I'm right. It's 10:20. It's recovering Congressman JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
The White House and Democrats not happy with the two landmark Supreme Court decisions on Friday, but polling shows most Americans are. We'll tell you about it at 10:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Thank you, Brother Ken. And if Ken reports it, we too shall talk about that entire subject in hour 3. Right now we're talking about, I don't even know if you can call it the race for the Republican nomination. Now let me, to use some legalese, let me issue this caveat. Things do change in politics. Kind of, I guess being a true boomer and a refugee of television news, I can almost think of the promos that the different weather departments or the promo teams at the different local stations are cutting about the storm season. Conditions can change minute to minute, hour to hour, so keep it here. Well, maybe not quite that quickly in politics, although I have seen changes, mixing metaphors, seismic changes in a short period of time. But we chronicled the Chris Christie approach to the Don-Ron dispute and the DeSantis Twitter video. And again, my advice, especially for Governor Christie, is not to refer, if you want to say there's childish bickering, don't call it a food fight. Just don't. Just stay away from that. Do a playground bickering talk about the playground. That tends to work a little better. But as I've mentioned, there are these top of mind responses. And again, just to set the stage, because there was a Democratic response, likewise the aptly named Dana Bash, who always seems to save her bashing for conservatives, was giving the kid glove treatment on Sunday on CNN's State of the Union to Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. It is interesting about the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. There are certain names in history that just work. That big Ponzi scheme, the financier who got in trouble, his name was Bernie Madoff, as in he made off with everybody's money. The undersecretary of the Treasury who went to make sure the big banks, remember, too big to fail, making sure they had liquidity, that guy's name was Neil Kashkari, as in carrying the cash. And then, of course, there was that military confrontation very early in the George W. Bush administration when one of our observation planes of the Navy flying in international waters, a Chinese jet fighter comes up and somehow collides. And I don't know if the Chinese hadn't stolen the right alloys from us yet. Maybe they were building their jets out of the lawn chair alloy. But the poor Chinese pilot goes to his demise, and our observation plane has to land in Chinese territory. Anyway, the Chinese pilot's name was pronounced Wong Wei. And Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And, of course, he is in a marriage, well, let's see, what's the diplomatic term? He has embraced an alternative lifestyle. He's the husband to another husband. So Dana Bash shows Pete Buttigieg the video half of the DeSantis attack ad on Trump with those quick shots of bodybuilder Chad and Brad Pitt in that 2004 role as Alexander the Great. And so Dana Bash, what about this, Mr. Secretary? We want you, and boy, Pete pauses. And really clever, he plays the victim Then he basically says, well, look, I can't talk politics when he gets off a political attack. And the political attack, his top of mind issue, he relates in what could be called, in the parlance of the 1960s, he relates it in almost a feline fashion. Meow. Take a listen to Cut 7. Do we have Cut 7?
I'm going to choose my words carefully, partly because I'm appearing as secretary, so I can't talk about campaigns. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to leave aside the strangeness of trying to prove your manhood by putting up a video that splices images of you in between oiled up, shirtless bodybuilders.
Oh, did that catch your eyes, Pete? Meow. You know, pal, what ought to be top of mind with you is the mess at the nation's airports. Speaking of messes, we will continue a modest suggestion for the U.S. Army and its new ad campaign. It's JD Hayworth. It's 10:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
.30 on the dot. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. TDOT still showing the right lane blocked 40 eastbound right before Bellevue. If you're trying to get into downtown Nashville from west of downtown, you're going to run into that. Again, that's the right lane blocked 40 eastbound right before Bellevue by a stalled vehicle. Full forecast coming up in 2 minutes. The White House and Democrats are not happy with the two landmark Supreme Court decisions on Friday, but polling shows most Americans approve. An ABC News poll says 52% of Americans approve of ending affirmative action and restricting the use of race as a factor in college admissions. The poll finds 45% of Americans approve of striking down Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, while 40% disapprove. And right now in South Nashville, everyone's accounted for, but some pets might have perished in that massive fire. Happened at the Gazebo apartment complex just off of 24 and Briley Parkway overnight. The Red Cross is on the scene to assist 10 families who lost their homes. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. You often hear me talk about diversification in the investing process, but how do we diversify? Well, we look for things that move in dissimilar fashion historically. Some of those market areas might be really small companies or really large companies, or very growth-oriented companies or value-oriented companies. And one of the things that we find is that when we diversify between these various segments, we can reduce the volatility of the portfolio because they don't move in tandem with each other historically. Now, we can do that in U.S. markets, we can do that in international markets, and in emerging markets. And when we can dampen that volatility, we can help get ourselves a little bit of a better outcome as far as knowing what we might likely have in the future or how we can take income from our investment portfolio. Now, we also want to add fixed income or bonds to the mix as well. Now, if we know that we need to do this, what's the best way to do it? Well, one of the things that we often teach is this concept of market efficiency. This won the Nobel Prize in economics as well. And it's the idea that if I'm investing in, let's say, small value stocks, if we look at professional managers and their ability to say, hey, should I have this stock or that one, and picking companies or areas of the market, we find that they typically get lower returns than the market does on its own. They just add expense and they can add a lot of volatility. One of the things we want to avoid is anything that can hurt your returns and increase your risk in the investing process. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call or call 615-851-1950.
24 minutes before 11 a.m. Next hour, the Tennessean is up to its old tricks with news analysis. I will name names, offer examples of how a news analysis always seems to try and quell legitimate concerns of everyday Americans. That is next hour, plus with Brother Ken reciting to us, reporting to us the poll results on the landmark decisions last week from the Supreme Court. Some more thoughts about those decisions, the 6-3 majority, and just for fun, the wailing and gnashing of teeth from a couple of leftists who always seem to be all over TV. Now, you know, we've marketing firms, corporations, consumer goods, grocers, brewers, bottlers. It seems that everybody, just about, has gotten an edumacation from what we'll call the Bud Light misfire. You know, when they take the guy who claims to be trans, Dylan Mulvaney, and let's just lay this out. This is my perspective, but I think it's borne out from all the different videos Mulvaney puts out. This guy may have had cosmetic feminization of his face. I'm not worried about the other parts right now, but you have a situation where when a Harvard-educated and Wharton Business School at Penn MBAer, Mrs. Heinerscheid, decided that Bud Light need to broaden its base to the trans community, and during the Final Four, they have that commercial with Dylan Mulvaney, who, look, he's a misogynist. He parodies a kind of airheaded adolescent girl, back when we used that term. And I was thinking the other day, and I've already shared with you the great voice and diction tongue twister among many of them in formal training in voice, speech, and diction for the stage. Kimmel Kirkencarnes cruelly kept the kiss his cousin Catherine Kennedy cried for. But, you know, we would have young ladies in that class. And what was the little play about, and maybe they made it in a movie, I want to say Heloise, about a young girl living at the Plaza Hotel in New York and seeing some things that to her childlike eyes, I can't remember, disagreements with her parents or some other stuff, and it sets up the absurdity of adult actions through a child's eyes. Okay, a nice idea. But at that point in time, so many years ago, Laugh-In had finished its run many years before, but Lily Tomlin was coming into her own, and one of her Laugh-In characters, when they have that giant rocking chair, my name's Edith Van, and I'm 5 years old, and all that stuff, every girl I knew who would do a scene from Heloise was just doing an impersonation of Edith Ann. And in that same spirit, what you're seeing from Dylan Mulvaney, if you remember the motion picture Tootsie, remember that in the early 80s? Dustin Hoffman in drag, an actor looking for work, gets the gig as a kind of matronly best friend to a knockout, and ingenue, portrayed by Jessica Lange, on a daily soap opera. And the film is comedic because it's how does the guy playing, what was his name, Dorothy, finally show his true intentions to Jessica Lange. Really, Dylan Mulvaney is doing a poor form of Dustin Hoffman in a later age, claiming he's serious about it. But look, all actors need work. It is performance art, and it is inherently misogynist. And that thing blew up in Bud Light's face. Now I'm reading that some of the bottling plants, you know, the brewers and distributors, Bud Light's numbers have dropped so far, so fast, that the brand is basically dead. Yeah, they're trying to save it. Good luck with that. Now it's affecting other Anheuser-Busch properties. Bud, formerly known as the king of beers, back when the avuncular great broadcaster and guts up Marine Reserve Colonel Ed McMahon was its spokesman. No problems for Budweiser back then. Now, whole nother story. So Bud is trying to wrap itself in red, white, and blue. Meantime, Bud Light has been replaced by Modelo as the best-selling beer. I'm sorry. Even though my old buddy Anthony Munoz, who I think both his kids were in sports at UT over in Knoxville. Anthony, what an athlete. 6'6", 290. On the broadcasting softball team we had in Cincinnati, the guy played shortstop. All-American offensive tackle for Southern Cal, also a left-handed pitcher on the SoCal baseball team. Can you imagine a guy, 6'7", 300 pounds as a left-hander on the mound? Oh, mercy. It would be something. But the bottom line is this whole thing Bud Light has brought upon itself. But understand this. These corporations culturally have changed. Apparently, they're willing to continue to take these hits. And what's worse, in terms of advertising or first-person endorsements, now our armed services are following suit. I'll have that for you in a second. But right now it's 615-737-9986. Had to look right down again. I was looking at too many things. 615-737-9986. 615-737-WWTN. From Nashville, it's Charles on the line. Hiya, Charles.
Hello, JD. I just wanted to call in and tell you how much I enjoy whenever you're on the air, and I wish they'd give you this spot permanently.
Wait, hang on just a second. Hang on just a second. Let's rewrite. Mac, you got the tape rolling?
We've got that.
Get the tape rolling. Now, again, Charles, this is not an inside job. I did not call you. I did not promise a payment or any type of trade. This is your spontaneous and unrehearsed opinion. Would you repeat it, please?
Yes, I enjoy every time that you're on the air, and I wish they would give you this spot permanently.
Bless your heart. Could I just say, let's throw off all the wiles of negotiation. Could I just say, I'll say what my old Philadelphia lawyer agent used to say. Charles, from your lips to God's ears. And to the management staff, this is what we call in the biz, Charles, this is POP, which is the acronym for proof of performance. So your call means a lot to me, and I hope and pray it will mean a lot to the management of this fine radio station. Let me leave it at that. What's on your mind, my brother?
Let's say all y'all people that really enjoy JD, call in and let them know.
Why, when I was a member of Congress, now you see, now this is something, and I know there are cynics out there, Charles, and we have to repeat, this is not something I've engineered. This is organic. This is grassroots. Though Nancy Pelosi and other broadcasters who might want a gig would claim it's AstroTurf, this is not preconceived. This is spontaneous. This is unrehearsed. But when I was a member of Congress, when the calls came in, when the letters came, when folks showed up at the town hall, what was that old line? A pretty good guy, although he was an unrepentant leftist. I got to know him in his later years out in Arizona, the late Hugh Downs. Well, he'd sign off 2020, if it's important to you, it's important to us. And I will take that portion. Again, Charles, I cannot thank you enough. I hope that you and yours have a glorious 4th of July. And thank you for making my day. And remember, after tomorrow's celebration, it's more verbal fireworks with me Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at this same time on many of this same station. So
and I'll enjoy it.
Bless you, Charles. You don't know what those encouraging words mean to me, and I thank you for that spontaneous and unrehearsed call. I really do appreciate it. Now, I know cynics out there. I know that some might have heard Charles and they would think that he was less than sincere. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing engineered, nothing choreographed, no kind of payola plugola, just one satisfied listener. So thanks again to Charles, and whatever's on your mind. Now, you may have an opposite point of view, and that's fine too. Because as a member of Congress, I used to get that. In fact, there was a leftist group, Citizen Action. And up in Flagstaff, I thought they should have changed their name to Citizens United Against Personal Hygiene. But they would bring in these real lefty grandmas, and they train them up to come to a town hall. And they tell them to come right down front because often they were diminutive. They were, now listen, I'm married to a sweet and petite lady, and let me tell you, dynamite comes in small packages. I know that from romantic domestic experiences with the lovely Miss Mary. But they would often have these senior women sitting down front, unrepentant leftists, and they would start it the same way. This is the way it always starts when they do a seminar thing. It usually tips you off. Here's the preamble. Congressman, I've been a Republican all my life. But your extreme brand of politics and your inexcusable conduct make me ashamed that you're my congressman. And you should be ashamed too. And they'd start it with that, and we'd just say, well, you know what? We're so glad you could come down today. We just so appreciate the fact that you came here, took the time to come, and you've obviously shared your opinion. Now, if you have a question, I'd be happy to answer it. And 9 times out of 10, there wouldn't be a question. There would just be the testimony of, well, okay, we'll go back to a colloquialism, the little old lady yelling at the hulking, big, I'd like to say ruggedly handsome congressman, but, well, I've got a face for radio. Again, when we come back, Madison Avenue, what it did for Bud Light. Apparently, the Pentagon is real keen on seeing it happen to the U.S. Army. That's straight ahead. It's 10 minutes in front of 10. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
All right, still got a 7-minute delay if you're trying to get into downtown Nashville from west of downtown. You've got a stalled vehicle. It is blocking the right lane of 40 eastbound right before Bellevue. And ABC News, yes, ABC News is breaking down numbers that show a majority of Americans approve of the Supreme Court's landmark decisions on Friday. We'll go over that with you coming up at 11 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Hey, Brother Ken.
Yeah, Brother JD.
I got to check something out here. Did you say what kind of delay is that coming in from the west?
That is an 8-minute delay.
And I thought you said 7 minutes.
It was. Now it's 8.
Now it's 8. I was going to stick with, I've heard of the 7-year itch.
Right.
But it's surprising. But they're able to figure that out and monitor it. Just like warp speed. This is anti-warp speed. There's now it's an 8-minute delay, and it ruins my little witticism. So it goes, but we will be listening with interest, and especially those folks who are sitting there in what is now, it was formerly a 7-minute delay. It is now increased to an 8-minute delay. That's the update. I mean, and who knows, when you come on here in about, a minute, 15 seconds.
Maybe it'll be gone.
That's right. Let's be optimistic.
There we go.
And even if there is a delay, listening to us, you will be properly entertained and informed. There, we've got a station promo right smack dab in the middle of that repartee. Well, Brother Ken, I shall be listening with interest, and we await the news with almost bated breath. Still to come, I've got the way the Army can change its old "be all that you can be" jingle. Hint, lyrics may need a little parental discretion, but probably not in this day and age. We've also got the Tennessean. I don't think this piece is trying to punk us over the Chinese buying farmland, but it just seems to be saying, what's a big deal? That's straight ahead. Now the news. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Eleven o'clock on the dot. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. And now that delay trying to get into downtown Nashville from the west is back down to 7 minutes. What you've got is you got a stalled vehicle. It's blocking the right lane there, 40 eastbound, right before Bellevue. Hot, humid, can't rule out thunderstorms. The risk for severe storms south of Murfreesboro today. It's a level 1 out of 5, so very low. But the fact that most of Middle Tennessee is going to stay dry today is good news, especially for crews still working to restore power to a couple of thousand people in Middle Tennessee who lost it yesterday after strong storms blew trees into lines. Full 4th of July forecast coming up in 2 minutes. ABC News has been breaking down the numbers that show a majority of Americans approve of the Supreme Court's landmark decisions on Friday.
A little more than half of Americans, 52%, say they approve of the High Court's decision to bar the use of affirmative action in college admissions, according to our new ABC News Ipsos poll. 32% say they disapprove of the ruling, a majority of Republicans and independents agreeing with the court, and 60% of white respondents, along with 58% of Asian respondents, also siding with the justices. Only 25% of black respondents agreeing with the decision.
That's Jay O'Brien reporting. And as for the court's decision Friday to strike down President Biden's student forgiveness plan, 45% of Americans said they supported that decision. 40% said they disapproved. Summer fun includes ziplining for some Americans, but Janai Norman reports frightening incidents are on the rise.
In Georgia, a father now planning a lawsuit against an adventure park after he says he was forced to save his daughter's life when one of the zip line ropes became wrapped around her neck, strangling her. And just days ago,
I lost conscious as soon as I took the impact.
a collision on the ropes in Colorado. Ziplining guide J.P. Schiller was attempting to rescue a 10-year-old boy who had gotten stuck on one of the lines when another zipliner came barreling into the 21-year-old at 30 miles an hour.
Now, an ABC News claims that experts warn that zipline companies are not mandated by safety regulations. That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Mercy, already hour 3 on this Independence Eve, July 3rd, 2023, recovering United States Congressman JD Hayworth of Arizona. So pleased and honored to be supplying the lyrics of life for Music City, USA, all of Middle Tennessee, and whoever you are and whatever you may be doing, cognizant of the fact that you could be listening to streaming audio via the internet at 997WTN.com. Ahead this hour, speaking of the lyrics of life, well, lyrics to the old Army jingle, "Be All That You Can Be," that's coming up. Also, the saying I heard in Washington, especially as the first Arizonan in history to be named to the powerful Ways and Means Committee, the saying in Washington is there are only two jobs worth having. One is to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. The other is to be president of the United States. The new Ways and Means chairman speaking out because with the IRS involvement with Hunter Biden, there sure are shades of administration manipulation that the chairman's trying to get to the bottom of. And since the Ways and Means Committee deals with the tax code and oversight of the IRS, it's worth hearing what the new chairman has to say, and also the wailing and gnashing of teeth from a couple of our, well, we might call them our favorite leftists, because they certainly are amongst the most infamous. That is coming up later with reference to newsman Ken's recitation of poll numbers, I should say reporting of poll numbers, concerning the recent landmark decisions by the Supreme Court. Oh yeah, and also I'll do my own news analysis of a news analysis offered by the Tennessean concerning Chinese ownership of American farmland. That is coming up. As always, your calls invited. 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. And should you care to reach out to me via social media, go to linkedin.com, type in J.D. Hayworth, Hayworth, link with me, and then if you get your courage and your candor from behind the keyboard, you can send me a message that I will share right here on the air. Now, this may end up, I'm walking the tightrope with this. But I think it still needs to be reported, and with a touch of humor that's not exactly adult, just more kind of silly, and it's inevitable. At any rate, one of the cool things about serving in Congress is that into your daily path come some incredible people, and you hear great stories even when you don't think you'll learn something. To wit, even the staff that I hired in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to call it my congressional office because, as the sign on the door said, this office belongs to the 6th Congressional District. This office belongs to the people of the 6th Congressional District of Arizona. And as I would tell folks, I was given temporary stewardship of that office. And yes, after redistricting, the numbers changed to the 5th District. No endorsement of having a 5th on the 4th, so be careful what you do tomorrow. At any rate, the point was I served at the pleasure of the people, as I would say, partly tongue-in-cheek, but always clearly understood. This office belongs to the people of the district. I have been given temporary stewardship of that office. I emphasize the word stewardship. My opponents emphasize the word temporary. And sure enough, after 6 terms, 12 years, longest I had held a gig, I finished second in the midterms of '06. One reason why, the redistricting that made it the 5th district gave me Arizona State University. And, of course, ASU is USA spelled backwards. At any rate, I digress. Here's the deal. My staff, you may remember one of Mark Twain's epic novels made into a movie, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Well, it just turned out that I had a couple of Connecticut Yankees working in an Arizonan's congressional office. One, my chief of staff, had been the chief of staff to B1 Bob Dornan, so he had been with an outspoken conservative. And after Dornan's electoral demise, he went to work for Martin Hoke of Ohio in more of a swing district. So since I was an outspoken conservative from a swing district, it made sense to have a guy who was used to dealing with outspoken conservatives and understood the politics of a swing district. By the way, if the name Martin Hoke sounds familiar, and Martin represented a portion of greater Cleveland and the suburbs there on the lake in Ohio, you hear Martin Hoke, he is the inventor of Navage. And you've heard him, and boy, he does a great read on those spots as a broadcaster listening to a true entrepreneur. At any rate, the second Connecticut Yankee in an Arizona congressman's office was my legislative director. Brilliant young lady, left Connecticut to go to the West Coast, was educated at Stanford, and then picked up her master's in international trade. And my legislative director's dad had been an advertising executive. And when the Army wanted to change its image back in the early 70s, when we were converting to an all-volunteer force, there had to be the right kind of appeal to young guys 18 to 25. And so the father of my legislative director was part of the ad team that put together the Be All That You Can Be campaign. Now, at the Pentagon, the general in charge of the appeal was a guy from my hometown of High Point, North Carolina, General Maxwell Thurman. You may remember Max Thurman. If you remember Bush 41, sending the Army into Panama to extract Manuel Noriega. General Thurman was the commanding general for that operation. And Max, having grown up in High Point, since my dad was a good friend of Max's and other friends lived in close proximity, the Max Thurman I knew as a young guy and as a native High Pointer was not the Max Thurman his staff knew. Max was a long, tall guy, not overweight, but he had oversized feet. And I don't know if he installed the ceremonial on his military footwear, on his dress uniform, and in his everyday wear. The people down the hall in his office could hear his walk, the click, click, click of his gait, G-A-I-T, down the corridor. They knew he was coming. He was a demanding taskmaster. So my legislative director's ad firm brings in the proposed ads to Max Thurman when they're going to do the Be All That You Can Be campaign. And Max was wonderfully self-deprecating and a tough talk. No, you guys have it wrong. The Army is full of bright, strong young men and young people, not pencil-neck geeks like me. And he shouts that in the command voice. At any rate, the jingle, Be All That You Can Be, was in vogue, was utilized, and in fact was so identified with General Max Thurman that when he passed away and was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery, and my dad and some other High Pointers, I was in Congress at the time, as he was being carried on the caisson to his final resting place, the Army band accompanying him did not play a funereal dirge. Instead, it played the jingle, Be All That You Can Be. Now, on a much more irreverent note, given the turn the Biden bunch has made at the Pentagon, given that the prime mission, apparently, of our armed forces is no longer to defend and protect Americans and American interests. No, it's to build diversity in the workplace. News comes from the Army of a trans major. This person calls themselves Major Rachel Jones, transgender, now identifying as female, but still apparently with all the equipment of the male, now head of the U.S. Army Sustainment Command Cyber Division. A recent Army publication details Jones' transition from male to female, and look, there are a lot of troubled people out there. And mental illness, whatever its form, usually has to do with discontentment and just wondering, why do I have such trouble? And so Major Rachel Jones, her narrative, her story is that her transition brought her back from the brink of severe depression and suicidal tendencies. So China's gearing up to start a hot war, probably first in Taiwan, but given the number of military-age Chinese males coming unattended into the United States via our open border, sadly, there's probably a fifth column. And then you have, I'll detail the Iranian situation later. But Libs of TikTok got a hold of the video. I'm going to save it for you. It's just maybe Wednesday we'll get to it. Let me just read what the tweet says. Trans Army Major discusses LGBTQ pride and diversity in the military. This was posted to the IG account of the U.S. Army Sustainment Command. The world is laughing at us. And we will revisit this on Wednesday. But my reaction, knowing the inside story of the great jingle appealing to young people to join what was called today's Army in the all-volunteer force of the 1970s, that Be All That You Can Be jingle needs to undergo its own lyrical rewrite. I will not call it semantic transitional surgery, just a little alteration of the lyrics. You ready to hear them? Okay, I hope this is not sounding my death knell professionally. It's fairly tame, given what you hear on the airwaves today. But instead of be all that you can be, my not so humble suggestion is, if it's such a big deal to attract trans recruits to today's Army, you can change the jingle to this. Change the way you pee. You can do it in today's Army. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm here following the next break. If I am, news analysis of the tome in today's Tennessean. It's the recovering congressman and risk-taking broadcaster, JD Hayworth, and it's 11:20 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Another one of our nation's finest has fallen in the line of duty. Details coming up at 11:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
11:24. I'm still here. Following this program, we're all adherents to Murphy's Law. That's Matt Murphy's Law, which means a fine broadcast will follow this one at high noon. Then on the drive today, one of my favorite people in the broadcast biz, Pamela Furr, in for Bry Y this afternoon on the drive, 3 till 7. So in my vast and encyclopedic show prep, I check out in the dead of night the website of the Tennessean, and featured front and center from the money section is a I think I'd call this news analysis. Todd Price over the Tennessean covers food and culture across the South. In other words, as they said in that epic Coen Brothers film, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" based on Homer's The Odyssey, I believe that's right. Yes. That's not my culture and heritage. In fact, when George W. Bush on Air Force One, the first request he made of me face-to-face, which I flat turned down, didn't deal with the border. It did deal with trade with China. I was on the plane with Jeff Flake, the aptly named Jeff Flake, the guy who is now Joe Biden's ambassador to Turkey. Boy, some guys just hand in glove. At any rate, President Bush, and one day I'll give you the whole story about Air Force One, but for purposes of this meeting, we're in the Airborne Oval Office. You guys gonna vote for this most favored nation trade for China? And of course, Flake is a guy like, if you remember the old Fred Travellina game show, anything for money. And I'm not talking about fundraising, quid pro quo, anything unethical. It's just that, hey, if the money guys are behind it, I'm behind it too. Oh, you bet, Mr. President, I'm a big proponent of free trade. And then George W. asked, what about you, Jay? You're on that Ways and Means Committee. Y'all handle that trade stuff. What are you going to do? I said, well, Mr. President, that ain't my culture and heritage. To make a little joke about it. And he says, well, and then suddenly he becomes like a Republican LBJ. Well, I bet if your commander-in-chief were to ask you for the help, I bet you'd think twice. I said, well, let's see. It's against my culture and heritage. He said, here's a speech I'm going to give out in L.A. to the Economic Club. I want you to read it. So I get the hands on the speech, and it's the same old hoo-ha about how trade with China, it was dead wrong. And Todd Price's article in the Tennessean, new worries emerge over Chinese ownership of American farmland. As of July 1st, no one on the U.S. Treasury Department's list of sanctioned individuals or a citizen of a sanctioned country can buy real estate in Tennessee. A new law signed by Governor Bill Lee in May is part of a wave of legislation that restricts foreign land ownership in the U.S. in most states. The laws that restricts foreign land ownership in the U.S. In most states, the laws focus on farmland. You see, when you put the periods beside the U and the S, it didn't tell me to stop. Across the South, new restrictions have been proposed or passed this year in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Well, hey, it's happened in Tennessee, too. So, Todd seeks out a guy who's an attorney at the University of Arkansas National Agricultural Land Center, a guy named Micah Brown. And he is stating the obvious. Well, many of the lawmakers state their reasoning as national security and food security. But then it comes down, and the bottom line with this thing, it's always interesting how ostensibly an objective article, just throws a little snark in. In the past, most state laws restricted any foreign ownership. The latest laws mainly target what Brown calls the Big Four: China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. And China is often framed as the greatest threat, even though only a tiny fraction of U.S. agricultural interests is owned by U.S. agricultural land is owned by Chinese interests. And then they talk about all the Canada, the Canadian, the Dutch, the Italian, the British, the German land holdings. And then finally, later in the article, they go, oh yeah, there have been efforts to buy farmland next to an Air Force base in North Dakota and close to a wind farm in Texas, receiving national media attention and causing politicians to react across the country. And then there's a history of, what do they call them here? Anti-foreign farm laws. Why, if I didn't know better, I'd think that Todd Price and this lawyer down at the University of Arkansas were accusing you and me of being xenophobic. And this will make them stop. George W. Bush used to use that term, talking about open borders. He talked about the new restrictionists. He was referring to guys like me who wanted to uphold the border. These new restrictionists, these xenophobes. But it's always kind of funny how you get the snark in the way the facts are introduced in papers like the Tennessean. Mercy me, I don't want to go too late. It's not exactly 11:30 on the dot. It's a minute past. Stand by for news. It's JD on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got the full forecast in 2 minutes, and very heavy hearts about a 2.5-hour drive north of Nashville. Tell City, Indiana Police Chief Derek Llewellyn today saying 20-year veteran officer Sergeant Heather Glenn died in exchange of gunfire with an armed suspect outside a hospital overnight.
Sergeant Glenn is, she's a cornerstone of our department. We are extremely heartbroken.
Suspect died too. And the district attorney in Philadelphia putting it bluntly today: don't shoot guns to celebrate the 4th of July.
The bottom line is the same thing. I don't care if you got a permit to carry. I don't care if you're in your yard. You have no right whatsoever to break the law by firing a weapon in the air.
He says bullets come down and they can kill people. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. You often hear me talk about diversification in the investing process, but how do we diversify? Well, we look for things that move in dissimilar fashion historically. Some of those market areas might be really small companies or really large companies, or very growth-oriented companies or value-oriented companies. One of the things that we find is that when we diversify between these various segments, we can reduce the volatility of the portfolio because they don't move in tandem with each other historically. Now, we can do that in U.S. markets, we can do that in international markets, and in emerging markets. And when we can dampen that volatility, we can help get ourselves a little bit of a better outcome as far as knowing what we might likely have in the future, or how we can take income from our investment portfolio. Now, we also want to add fixed income or bonds to the mix as well. Now, if we know that we need to do this, what's the best way to do it? Well, one of the things that we often teach is this concept of market efficiency. This won the Nobel Prize in economics as well. And it's the idea that if I'm investing in, let's say, small value stocks, if we look at professional managers and their ability to say, hey, should I have this stock or that one, and picking companies or areas of the market, we find that they typically get lower returns than the market does on its own. They just add expense and they can add a lot of volatility. One of the things we want to avoid is anything that can hurt your returns and increase your risk in the investing process. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call, or call 615-851-1950.
11:36. Heading down the home stretch, Super Talk 99.7 WTN. The recovering congressman and legend in his own mind, North Carolina native, and now longtime Arizonan, JD Hayworth behind this microphone. Number to call is always 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. Checking in via LinkedIn and the message device there in social media. It's Matt. Matt wants to discuss. He goes back, about 2 hours ago, when I was pointing out it probably wasn't a good idea for Chris Christie, who, like yours truly, underwent weight management surgery, but mine took, and Chris doesn't appear to be doing it. I was saying, hey, Chris, don't use the image of a food fight to talk about the Trump-DeSantis tiff currently in progress. So Matt checks in. The former governor of the Garden State called it a food fight because he really wanted to partake in the spoils of war. Yeah, another fat joke. I've heard a million of them. The other thing that was the taunts when I was a kid, it wasn't fatso over there in High Point, it was fat boy. And then I looked around and man, finally some genius took one of those big ice cream sandwiches and named it what? Fat boy. So yeah, I guess I've added a little upholstery to the frame. Nothing like Chris, but I guess you could call me fat boy. Heck, once it happens to you, even when I got the smallest I'd been since the 8th grade, which was like down around 215, because I was a big old boy. You got to 8th grade, I was 6'2", and then I grew up, almost got to 6'5", and now that I'm growing up more, I'm starting to shrink, but I digress. Enough about my favorite subject, me. Let me talk about the committee on which I used to serve and also point out to you that one of the publications on Capitol Hill, the eponymously named, it's real simple, The Hill. There is an opinion piece. Boy, talk about interesting timing. We need a serious conversation about Joe Biden's brain. Gee, you think? And another magazine is saying, yeah, the Democrats absolutely should primary old Joe. And the smiling cobra, gruesome Gavin Newsom, is basically out there on the campaign trail. These are the sub-headlines atop the Drudge Report at this hour. And, of course, the biggest headline is always an anti-Trump thing. Apparently, the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, continues to leak stuff. And here it's framed as a question. When you see it framed as a question, you know it is not verified. Trump shared secrets on Mar-a-Lago patio? When it's a question, it's an accusation. So at least the Drudge people did that, so understand that. When it comes to wrongdoing, the reason the Dems are talking about, hey, yeah, it turns out old Joe is senile. Wow. Now that we're closing in on election year, I guess we better pay attention to that. My old committee, Ways and Means. The powerful, in the old days on these, Welcome to Face the Nation. Today, the chairman of the powerful Ways and Means Committee, Arkansas Democrat Wilbur Mills, will face the nation. Wow, that's a flashback from the comparative Stone Age. But the reason the Ways and Means Committee is called the powerful Ways and Means Committee, the Ways and Means Committee controls the tax code. And since all revenue bills must originate in the House, even though the guys in the Senate always think they're so special, As my fifth grade teacher, Miss Sarah McCallum, used to say over at Northwood Elementary School in High Point, boys and girls, the United States Senate is called the world's most exclusive club. And that's because there are only 100 members. 2 senators from each of our states. Since there are 50 states, there are 100 members of the U.S. Senate, the world's most exclusive club. So you got to understand the back and forth between the House and the Senate. The House is the people's house. The Senate basically started as a kind of House of Lords, but it's problematic because we have no titles of nobility in the United States. So as noted historian and one-time House Speaker Newt Gingrich pointed out, the Senate spent its first 6 years of existence really not knowing what to do. There are no records of the U.S. Senate for its first 6 years in session. Later, they started to take seriously the whole notion of confirming presidential appointments, ratifying treaties, but still, try as it might, the Senate Finance Committee will never achieve the power and status of the Ways and Means Committee because the tax bills have to originate in the House. And the Senate can get concurrence, but they have to follow the mark from the House Ways and Means Committee. The other capacity that every congressional committee has is oversight. Since the Internal Revenue Service is, hand in glove with tax law and the tax code, Ways and Means has primary oversight. Friday, on The Story with Martha McCallum, Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith. And by the way, Jason's not a guy who spent a lot of years in Washington. He is not one of the guys who is a friend to K Street. This guy is from Missouri. He's a no-nonsense guy. In fact, one of the papers on Capitol Hill said, well, he's one of those MAGA types, to which I say, God bless him. So here is the comparatively young, comparatively innovative Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith talking about the conflicting stories from the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, and what needs to be done. This is cut 8.
It's clearly someone is lying, and that is what we've said all along, is that we're going to follow the facts. And what we have to follow is information from everyone who was present at that October 7th meeting that the whistleblower said that the prosecutor in Delaware said that, he couldn't bring charges, especially in Washington, D.C., and that he was declined. He tried to bring charges in California and it was declined. He asked for a special counsel and he was declined. Yet the Attorney General of the United States has said in Senate testimony, in fact, that the prosecutor there in Delaware had complete independence. But that's why we're asking for 12 people. That's why eight individuals from the Department of Justice, 2 from the IRS, and 2 from the FBI, that we need to have them come in for testimony.
So that translates congressional subpoenas that carry the weight of law. Will Merrick Garland be among those subpoenaed? And will he try to ignore the subpoena, as did Obama's first Attorney General? Oh, what a beaut that guy was. And will Congress enforce the subpoena? Listen, there is a brig. The old chairman, the old sergeant at arms in the House told me, said, yeah, we've got a cell down there. The original Supreme Court chamber, is right there on the first floor of the Capitol. Down in the basement under that, there is a holding cell. Now, that would be problematic, would it not? Because the Capitol Police would have to serve the subpoena and walk right into the Department of Justice. Gee, do you think Merrick Garland and Chris Wray would have armed agents there to meet the Capitol Police? Hey, I wonder if the Capitol Police would just go stake out Merrick Garland's house. Oh, and invite Fox and Newsmax and America One Network and News Nation, and do to Merrick Garland what was done to Roger Stone and what was done to former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Of course, it wasn't done to Joe Biden. Never a shakedown at his Delaware beach house or his primary residence in Delaware. You know, the one with the Corvette and all the classified documents? Gee, isn't that something? And we were all told there would be equal justice under the law. Well, I know we often refer to George Orwell's 1984, but in this case, it seems a little portion of George Orwell's Animal Farm is in order. Remember, the barnyard animals get together and they're going to bring sweetness and light and utopia to the barnyard. And they set up a declaration of principles, and first there is all animals are created equal, but not a lot of time passes, and different critters have these concepts of how to seize power. So somebody gets out a big paint can and slops, maybe it's because it's slopped on there, all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others. The Supreme Court says equal justice under law. What's going on right now under this regime? You might as well get a jackhammer and say, but some are more deserving of equality than others. No, check that. They'll probably cover it up and do equity for all. And as you and I know, equity is not equality of opportunity. It is insurance of an outcome. And it does not mean that we are equal at all. It's very dangerous. Speaking of the Supreme Court, when we come back, the landmark decisions, the recent polling, and wailing and gnashing of teeth from a couple of infamous leftists, and then before we part company, the way a pair of founding fathers exited our planet, and the surprising date in which they were both called to their heavenly home. It's 10 till noon. It's JD Hayworth on WTN. 3 minutes in front of high noon. Maybe have to fudge a little bit before you and I get gone. First, on CNN, since Chris got licked and thrown out, CNN back to its radical leftist views. Van Jones, so radical Obama couldn't get him on the EPA. He's been a long-time CNN contributor. Here he is reacting to the ruling striking down affirmative action in college admissions, cut 9.
Well, look, this is a tragedy. If you care about inclusion and equal opportunity and you care about folks who don't have much and trying to make it today, this is a tragedy. But it's a tragedy that's a result of a strategy. And that's what I think we sometimes forget. This is a deliberate effort on the part of conservatives to hijack the courts and use them to do what's happening today. The Federalist Society was organizing on campuses, getting law students together in the 80s and the 90s, setting this thing up.
Hang on a second. Van, you mean the Federalists started thinking about how to get more conservative jurists back in the 80s and 90s? Well, how about George Soros deciding to try to buy the secretaries of state's positions in the various sovereign states, since they handle elections, started when I was in Congress. Now elections in my home state of Arizona have changed radically. Some suspect they've been stolen. What about that, Van? Oh, and it wouldn't be complete unless we hear from AOC. She's saying the Democrat-run Senate Judiciary Committee is going to go after conservatives on the court. Cut 10.
First, we have a Senate Judiciary Committee that is beginning the process of investigating the entanglements and conflicts of interest. Just 1 to 2 weeks before the student loan ruling, the country learned that Justice Samuel Alito was accepting gifts from billionaires who were lobbying against Supreme Court that were lobbying before the Supreme Court against student loan forgiveness. Just weeks before, we learned that he was accepting gifts from them and travel and vacations from them before he decided to vote and rule in their favor.
Hang on a second, AOC. You've made it a little sloppy with that. Long-standing ethics of jurisprudence, justices are free to take trips. In fact, Antonin Scalia was on a paid-for hunting trip to Texas, as I recall, when he met his untimely demise. Before we finish the show, just one thing. July 4th and the good Lord's sense of humor. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams got so bitter with each other, they made a bet who would die first. On July 4th, 1826, Jefferson's last words were, "Is it the 4th?" Adams' last words were, "Jefferson still survives." They both died the same day. JD Hayworth, stay brave, stay free, stay tuned. It's high noon.